In Dubai Marina, where crystal towers pierce the desert sky and luxury yachts bob like floating palaces, the most romantic wedding gift of 2017 became a crime scene that would haunt three families forever. The yacht was purchased with borrowed money and desperate love, decorated with dreams of forever, and christened with blood on an October night that changed everything. But here's what the police reports never mentioned, what the newspapers couldn't print, what the families buried deeper than the body itself. This wasn't a crime of passion that exploded in a moment of blind rage. This was a betrayal so methodical, so deeply rooted in secrets and lies, that it had been destroying three lives simultaneously for nearly 2 years before anyone died. Everyone involved knew exactly what they were risking. The husband who mortgaged his future for love. The wife who married security while her heart belonged elsewhere. The best friend who had already broken her once and was about to do it again. They all saw the collision coming, but none of them had the courage to step aside. The wedding lasted 6 hours. The marriage lasted 3 months. The cover-up has lasted 7 years, until now. Meet Rami Al-Khatib, 29 years old in early 2017, owner of Al-Khatib Construction, a modest but steady family business that built middle-class homes across Dubai's expanding suburbs. To everyone who knew him, Rami was the embodiment of everything an Emirati man should be. Respectful to his elders, generous with his friends, punctual at Friday prayers, and devoted to his aging parents who had sacrificed everything to build their small construction empire. But beneath this perfect traditional facade, Rami carried a secret burden that was slowly consuming him. Despite his business success, despite his family's pride, despite having everything a man his age should want, Rami felt profoundly, desperately alone. He was 29 and had never experienced real love. Not the arranged meetings his mother orchestrated, not the polite conversations with suitable daughters from good families, but the kind of love that makes you forget to eat, that changes your voice when you speak about someone. His family had been gently pressuring him toward marriage for 3 years. They introduced him to accountants and teachers, pharmacists and government employees, all wonderful women from respectable families. Rami went through the motions, shared tea in formal sitting rooms, made polite conversation about careers and values. But he felt nothing. Just emptiness. He was beginning to believe he was fundamentally broken, incapable of the connection he watched his married friends describe with wonder. What made this loneliness even more painful was Rami's secret dream. Since childhood, he had fantasized about owning a yacht. Not a massive vessel that screamed wealth, but a modest, beautiful boat where he could take his future wife to watch the sunset, where they could escape the noise of the city and find peace together. This dream sustained him through years of family meetings about marriage, through his mother's worried looks when he remained single. Then, in February 2017, everything changed. Lina Masri walked into his construction office for a design consultation, and Rami experienced love at first sight for the first and only time in his life. Lina was 24, half Lebanese from her mother's side, half French from her father's, with the kind of effortless beauty that made people turn their heads without realizing why. She had moved to Dubai in 2015, establishing herself as a freelance interior designer specializing in residential projects. Professionally, she was thriving. Personally, she was running from a relationship in Beirut that had ended so badly it left her questioning her judgment about men entirely. What Rami saw was a woman who carried herself with quiet confidence, who spoke about design with genuine passion, who listened carefully and asked thoughtful questions. When she smiled, which she did often during their first meeting, her entire face transformed. Rami found himself extending their consultation for 2 hours, discussing details about crown molding and lighting fixtures that had nothing to do with his current project. What Lina saw was stability incarnate. A man who spoke softly but with certainty, who had built something real with his own hands, whose respect for her professional opinion felt genuine rather than patronizing. After 2 years of rebuilding herself in Dubai, of proving she could succeed independently, she found herself drawn to Rami's groundedness in a way that surprised her. The courtship was swift by traditional standards but felt perfectly natural to both families. Rami's parents were charmed by Lina's bilingual abilities and professional success. Her Lebanese mother, visiting from Beirut, approved of Rami's traditional values and financial stability. By May 2017, Engagement plans were being discussed over family dinners. But there was a shadow neither family could see. When Ramy mentioned his best man would be his cousin Zayed Al-Khatib, Lina's blood went cold. She knew that name intimately, painfully, and with a complexity that would prove deadly. Zayed Al-Khatib, 30, had been Ramy's closest friend since childhood. Where Ramy was steady and contemplative, Zayed was charming and spontaneous. He ran a small events planning business that specialized in corporate gatherings and private parties, work that suited his natural ability to make people feel comfortable and important. Women were drawn to his easy confidence and genuine warmth, but Zayed had never been able to commit to any relationship for longer than a few months. What the families didn't know was that Zayed and Lina had a history that stretched back to 2015. They had met at a Dubai networking event for young entrepreneurs, and their attraction had been immediate and intense. For 4 months, they had conducted a passionate but secret relationship that ended abruptly when Zayed's commitment issues overwhelmed his feelings for her. He had simply stopped calling, stopped responding to messages, disappeared from her life without explanation or closure. Now, 2 years later, Zayed was walking back into her life as her fiancé's best man and closest family member. When Ramy excitedly introduced them at the engagement party, Zayed's eyes widened in recognition and something that looked like regret. Lina maintained perfect composure, shaking his hand with polite formality while her heart hammered against her ribs. Neither said a word to Ramy about their past. Neither wanted to complicate what appeared to be a perfect match. But in that moment of recognition, with wedding plans accelerating around them, something inevitable was set in motion. The perfect beginning was already becoming the perfect storm, and none of them could see the destruction coming until it was far too late to change course. 2 years earlier, in September 2015, Lina Masri stepped off Emirates flight EK 751 from Beirut carrying nothing but 2 suitcases and a broken heart. She was 22, fresh out of university, and running from a relationship that had shattered her trust in love so completely that she had decided Dubai would be her chance to start over. Not just professionally, but emotionally. She would build a life where she controlled every variable, where no one could disappear from her world without warning. The first few months were brutal. Dubai in 2015 was booming, but for a young Lebanese woman with no connections and limited savings, finding clients for her interior design business felt impossible. She lived in a shared apartment in Karama, survived on instant noodles and determination, and spent her evenings networking at every business event she could find. She was lonely, vulnerable, and desperate to prove she could make it on her own. It was at one of these networking events, a young entrepreneur's meetup in a DIFC hotel, that she first saw Zayed Al-Khatib. He was standing near the buffet table, making a group of strangers laugh with what seemed like effortless charm. He had the kind of presence that drew people in, confident without being arrogant, warm without being overwhelming. When their eyes met across the room, Lina felt something she hadn't experienced since her heartbreak in Beirut. Recognition. Not of his face, but of a possibility she thought she had closed off forever. Zayed approached her during the coffee break, and their conversation lasted 3 hours. He was genuinely interested in her design work, asked thoughtful questions about her vision for residential spaces, and shared his own dreams of expanding his events business beyond corporate gatherings. But more than that, he made her laugh. For the first time in months, Lina felt like herself again. Beautiful, intelligent, worthy of attention from someone who seemed to have everything together. What followed was 4 months of the most intense relationship of Lina's life. They met in secret, not because they were ashamed, but because the intensity of their connection felt too precious to share with the world. Zayed would pick her up after client meetings, and they would drive to Jumeirah Beach, talking until sunrise about their fears, their ambitions, their dreams of what life in Dubai could become. He was passionate about everything, from his work to his family to the way he kissed her like she was oxygen and he had been drowning. But passion, Lina learned, could be a double-edged sword. Zayed's intensity extended to his commitment issues. He wanted her completely but couldn't promise her tomorrow. He spoke about loving her but panicked when she mentioned introducing him to her visiting mother. Their relationship existed in a beautiful bubble that he refused to let connect to the real world. By January 2016, the bubble had become a prison. Zayed started cancelling plans, responding to messages hours later, making excuses that felt rehearsed. Then, one February morning, he simply stopped responding altogether. No explanation, no closure, no acknowledgement that 4 months of their lives had ever happened. The abandonment devastated Lina in ways she hadn't expected. She had trusted him with her vulnerability, shared her dreams of building something real in Dubai, let him see her at her most hopeful. His disappearance made her question everything about herself. Was she too needy? Too serious? Had she misread every signal, every kiss, every whispered promise? She spent weeks analyzing their last conversations, looking for clues she might have missed, trying to understand how someone could vanish so completely from another person's life. The pain drove her to make a decision that would define the next 2 years of her life. She would never again allow herself to be vulnerable to abandonment. She threw herself into her design work with single-minded determination, building a client base through sheer force of will and talent. She dated occasionally, but kept every relationship surface level, never letting anyone close enough to hurt her the way Zayed had. By early 2017, she had built the successful, independent life she had dreamed of. But she had also built walls around her heart that she thought were permanent. Then Rami walked into her life, and for the first time since Zayed, those walls began to crack. Rami offered something Zayed never could: stability, consistency, the promise of a future built on trust rather than passion. Lina convinced herself that this was better, healthier, more mature. She was choosing security over the chaos of desire, partnership over the intensity that had nearly destroyed her. But when Rami mentioned his cousin and best man Zayed Al-Khatib, Lina's carefully constructed world tilted on its axis. The name hit her like a physical blow, bringing back every memory she had spent 2 years trying to bury. She managed to maintain her composure during the conversation, but that night she lay awake staring at the ceiling, her heart pounding with a mixture of dread and something she refused to acknowledge as anticipation. The past, it seemed, was not nearly as buried as she had believed. And in a few short months, she would be forced to face the man who had taught her that love and abandonment could feel like the same thing. What she didn't know was that Zayed had spent every day of those 2 years regretting the biggest mistake of his life. July 28, 2017. 3 weeks after their wedding, Lina stood on the deck of the yacht that was supposed to symbolize her new life, watching Zayed arrange cushions with the same careful attention he had once given to planning their secret dates. Rami had asked his cousin to help Lina with the final decorating touches while he handled an urgent client crisis. It seemed like such an innocent request. Family helping family. What could go wrong? But the moment they were alone together on the water, surrounded by the glittering Dubai Marina skyline, 2 years of buried emotions rose to the surface. They worked in careful silence for the first hour, maintaining the polite distance they had perfected during wedding preparations. Zayed focused on installing LED lighting. Lina arranged flowers in crystal vases, each movement deliberate and controlled. Then Zayed broke the silence with words that shattered her composure. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if I hadn't been such a coward?" His voice was quiet, almost lost in the sound of water lapping against the hull, but Lina heard every syllable with painful clarity. "You can't ask me that," she whispered, not meeting his eyes. "Not now. Not here. Not on his wedding gift to me." But even as she said the words, she felt the walls around her heart beginning to crack. Zayed moved closer, and she could smell his cologne, the same scent that had once made her dizzy with desire. "I think about it every day," he continued. "I think about how different everything could have been if I had been brave enough to fight for us instead of running away. The life we could have built together, the conversations we could have had, the mornings I could have woken up next to you." Lina finally looked up, and the moment their eyes met, she knew she was lost. "You made your choice," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "You left me broken and alone. You don't get to come back now and pretend it was all a mistake." "It was a mistake," Zayed said, reaching for her hand. "The biggest mistake of my life." Their fingers touched, and 2 years of suppressed longing ignited like gasoline meeting a flame. The kiss that followed was inevitable, desperate, and completely devastating. Immediately afterward, They sprang apart as if burned. Lina's hand flew to her lips, her eyes wide with shock and guilt. "We can't," she said, backing away. "I won't do this to Ramy. He's a good man. He doesn't deserve this." Zayed nodded, running his hands through his hair. "You're right. I'm sorry. That should never have happened. It won't happen again." But they both knew it was a lie. The door that had been carefully locked for 2 years had been kicked wide open. August and September 2017 became months of elaborate deception and growing desperation. What started as a moment of weakness evolved into systematic betrayal. They began meeting regularly under the pretense of yacht maintenance. Lina would tell Ramy she was working on interior design, while Zayed claimed he was helping with technical improvements. Ramy, trusting completely and working long hours, never questioned these explanations. He was thrilled that his wife and cousin were bonding, that his 2 favorite people were working together to make his dream yacht perfect. He would call from construction sites to check on their progress, and Lina would answer cheerfully while Zayed's hands traced patterns on her skin just out of view. Zayed was relentless in his pursuit, constantly telling Lina they belonged together, that their connection was too powerful to ignore. "You feel it too," he would whisper during stolen moments. "The way you light up when you see me. The way you lean into my touch even when you're trying to resist. You can't fake chemistry like this." Lina lived 2 completely different lives. During the day, she was the dutiful wife, preparing meals for Ramy, attending family gatherings. But in afternoons on the yacht, she was someone else entirely. Someone who laughed too loudly, touched too freely, allowed herself to feel desires she had buried for 2 years. The guilt was eating her alive. Every time Ramy kissed her goodnight, every time he spoke excitedly about their future, every time he mentioned how grateful he was that she and Zayed were getting along, Lina felt like she was drowning in deception. Meanwhile, Ramy began to notice subtle changes that sent cold tendrils of doubt through his happiness. Lina had become distant in ways he couldn't articulate. She would space out during conversations, her responses seemed rehearsed, and most troubling, she had stopped initiating physical affection. When he tried to discuss their future, she would deflect with jokes or sudden urgent tasks. Their friends noticed the tension during social gatherings. The easy rapport they had shared during courtship had been replaced by polite but careful interactions. Lina would laugh at Ramy's jokes, but the laughter seemed forced. The couple that had seemed perfectly matched now looked like 2 people playing uncomfortable roles. Ramy's self-doubt began to consume him. Maybe he wasn't exciting enough for someone as worldly as Lina. Maybe she was regretting her decision to marry him. Maybe the stability he offered wasn't enough to sustain a passionate, intelligent woman who could have had anyone she wanted. On October 15, 2017, everything came to a head. Lina told Ramy she was meeting a potential client for consultation in JBR and wouldn't be home until late. Something in her tone, perhaps the way she avoided eye contact or the slight tremor in her voice, triggered his suspicions. For the first time in their relationship, he decided to check her location. When his phone showed her at Dubai Marina rather than JBR, Ramy's world tilted. His hands shook as he stared at the map, watching the blue dot that represented his wife sitting motionless at their yacht. The yacht he had bought as a symbol of their love, the place where she claimed to be working on their future. The drive to the marina felt like the longest 20 minutes of Ramy's life, each traffic light bringing him closer to a truth he desperately didn't want to discover. But he had to know. He had to see for himself what was happening on the boat that was supposed to represent everything good about their marriage. Ramy parked his pickup truck in the marina's visitor section, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles had turned white. The familiar scent of salt water and diesel fuel filled his nostrils as he walked down the wooden dock, each footstep echoing in the evening quiet. The security guard, Hassan, recognized him immediately and waved with a friendly smile. "Evening, Mr. Al-Khatib. Working late on the beautiful boat tonight." Ramy managed a nod, not trusting his voice to remain steady. Hassan had been there the day Ramy first brought Lina to see the yacht, had witnessed the joy on her face when she realized this floating dream was theirs. Now, as Ramy approached slip number 47, that same yacht sat bathed in the golden glow of its interior lighting, looking peaceful and inviting from the outside. But as he drew closer, soft voices drifted across the water. Laughter. Intimate, familiar laughter that made his stomach clench with recognition. He could hear Lina's voice, lighter and more animated than it had been at home in weeks, mixed with the deeper tones of a man who sounded exactly like his cousin. Ramy's heart hammered against his ribs as he stepped onto the yacht's deck, moving with practiced silence across the teak planking he had lovingly selected months earlier. The voices were coming from the main cabin below deck. Ramy descended the narrow stairs that led to what was supposed to be their private sanctuary, each step feeling like a descent into his own personal hell. What he saw through the partially open cabin door stopped him cold. Lina was sitting on the cream-colored sofa they had chosen together, her body angled toward Zayed in a way that spoke of complete comfort and intimacy. They were talking quietly, their faces close together, and as Ramy watched in frozen horror, he saw his wife reach up and touch his cousin's cheek with the same tenderness she had once reserved for him. The gesture was so gentle, so familiar, that it told a story of repeated meetings and growing affection. Then they kissed. Not the desperate, guilty kiss of a moment's weakness, but the slow, sure kiss of two people who had done this many times before. Ramy felt his world fracture along fault lines he hadn't even known existed. This wasn't a single mistake or moment of poor judgment. This was a relationship. This was betrayal so complete it rewrote the entire history of his marriage. The sound that escaped his throat was somewhere between a gasp and a growl, and both Lina and Zayed sprang apart. Lina's face went through a series of expressions in rapid succession. Surprise, recognition, terror, and finally, resignation. Zayed stood quickly, his hands raised in what might have been surrender or an attempt to maintain calm. "Ramy," Zayed said, his voice carefully controlled. "Let me explain what's happening here." But Ramy was past explanations. The careful control he had maintained his entire life, the respect for family and tradition that had been drilled into him since childhood, the quiet dignity that everyone praised him for, shattered like glass hitting concrete. "Explain." The word came out as a roar. "Explain how my wife and my best friend have been meeting secretly on the yacht I bought her? Explain how you've been lying to my face every day for months." Zayed stepped forward, placing himself between Ramy and Lina. "It's not what you think. We were trying to figure out how to tell you. We never meant for this to happen." "Never meant for what to happen?" Ramy's voice cracked with the strain of emotions too large for his chest to contain. "Never meant to fall in love? Never meant to betray me? Or never meant to get caught?" The physical confrontation began when Zayed reached out to touch Ramy's shoulder, perhaps trying to calm him or guide him back upstairs. But Ramy's rage had found its target, and he shoved his cousin hard enough to send him stumbling backward toward the cabin's sliding glass door. Zayed caught himself and tried to reason with him, but Ramy was beyond reasoning. "You were my brother," Ramy said, his voice breaking. "I trusted you with everything. I asked you to help her feel welcome in our family. I asked you to be there for her when I couldn't be." Each word was punctuated by another push, driving Zayed further back. Zayed tried to restrain him, grabbing Ramy's arms and attempting to hold him still. "Stop this. Violence won't solve anything. If you'll just listen, we can work this out like adults." But Ramy had passed the point where adult conversation was possible. He broke free from Zayed's grip and shoved him with all the strength that came from years of construction work. Zayed stumbled backward through the open cabin door onto the deck, lost his footing on the smooth teak surface, and fell hard into the marina's shallow water below. The splash was followed by Zayed's shouts of pain and surprise. He had landed badly, his shoulder striking the concrete edge of the dock, but he was conscious and moving. Alive, but clearly injured. Lina screamed and tried to push past Ramy to reach the deck and check on Zayed. Ramy caught her arm, and she spun around to face him, her eyes blazing with fury and fear. "Let me go to him," she demanded. "He could be seriously hurt." "You want to go to him?" Ramy's voice was deadly quiet now. "You want to choose him over me? Fine. But first, tell me how long. Tell me how long you've been making a fool of me." Lina's composure finally cracked completely. "You want to know the truth? Fine. I never loved you the way I love him. I married you because you were safe, because you wouldn't hurt me like he did. But I've been dead inside every day of this marriage, pretending to be happy while feeling nothing." The words hit Ramy like physical blows. He had built his entire life around making her happy, had mortgaged his future to buy her dreams, had believed their quiet love was the foundation of something beautiful and lasting. To learn it had all been pretense, that she had been enduring rather than enjoying their life together, was worse than the betrayal itself. Lina tried to run past him toward the deck, but grief and rage had made Ramy unpredictable. When she pushed against him, he pushed back. When she slapped him across the face, the sharp crack of palm against cheek echoing in the cabin, his hand moved reflexively to shove her away. But Lina was smaller than Zayed, and Ramy's grief had made him stronger than he realized. She stumbled backward toward the cabin's built-in bar, her head striking the polished steel corner rail with a sound that would haunt Ramy for the rest of his life. She collapsed to the cabin floor, and within seconds, blood began to pool beneath her head, dark red against the cream-colored carpet they had chosen together. The silence that followed was absolute. No more shouting, no more accusations, no more pleas for understanding. Just the gentle lapping of water against the hull and the distant sound of Zayed calling Lina's name from the water below. Ramy dropped to his knees beside his wife's motionless form, his hands hovering over her body, afraid to touch her and confirm what his eyes were already telling him. The woman he had loved more than his own life was gone, and he had killed her. The sound of Zayed climbing back onto the yacht deck broke the terrible silence. Water dripped from his clothes as he pulled himself up with his uninjured arm, clearly in pain but driven by adrenaline. He stumbled into the cabin, and when he saw Lina's motionless form surrounded by spreading blood, his face went ashen. For a long moment, the two men stared at each other across the body of the woman they had both claimed to love. No words were spoken. None were needed. In that moment of shared horror, a decision was made that would bind them together forever. This couldn't be reported. This couldn't be explained. This couldn't destroy both their families. Zayed's eyes met Ramy's, and in them, Ramy saw not accusation but complicity. They were both guilty now. They were both trapped. Ramy's hands shook as he dialed his father's number. "Baba, I need you to come to the marina. Bring Uncle Mahmoud. Don't ask questions. Just come now." The weight of tradition, of family honor, of protecting the Al-Khatib name activated a network that had existed for generations. Within an hour, the marina was quietly swarming with activity that would never appear in any official report. Ramy's father arrived with his brother Mahmoud, whose connections in Dubai ran deeper than oil wells. Phone calls were made to people who owed favors, to officials who valued discretion over duty, to individuals whose loyalty could be purchased. The marina's security footage developed mysterious technical glitches for the exact hours in question. The medical examiner who arrived was Dr. Khalil Al-Mansuri, a family friend who had attended Ramy's wedding. His examination was brief, his findings clear. Tragic accident aboard a yacht. Young woman struck her head during a fall, death instantaneous. No signs of struggle. Lina's Lebanese family received a devastating phone call in the early hours of October 16th. Their daughter had suffered a tragic accident while working alone on the yacht. A moment of lost balance, a cruel twist of fate. The Al-Khatib family would handle all arrangements with the respect their beloved daughter-in-law deserved. Money changed hands. Documents were filed. Questions that might have been asked weren't. Within 48 hours, Lina's body was on a flight to Beirut, where she would be buried while her parents struggled to understand how their careful daughter could have died in such a senseless accident. Zayed's guilt manifested as immediate flight. Within a week, he had transferred his events business to his partner and purchased a one-way ticket to Doha. Before leaving, he had one final conversation with Ramy's father. The older man's words were absolute: "This secret dies with us. If it comes out, it destroys our entire family. Your silence protects everyone." Zayed understood. Speaking would accomplish nothing except spreading the pain wider. The yacht was sold within 3 weeks, far below market value. Ramy moved to Sharjah, telling everyone he needed distance from the memories. His construction business began to fail as he lost the focus that had built it. Clients noticed the change in him, the way his eyes seemed to look through people, the way he sometimes stopped mid-sentence as if listening to voices only he could hear. Ramy became a ghost haunting his own life. He aged a decade in the first year, his hair graying prematurely, his shoulders carrying a weight that bent his posture. Sleep brought nightmares where Lina's voice asked why he had killed her for loving someone else. Waking hours brought memories of every lie she had told, every kiss she had given him while thinking of another man. 7 years have passed since that October night in Dubai Marina. Ramy lives alone in Sharjah, working occasionally but never rebuilding his life. Zayed remains in Qatar, married now to a woman who knows nothing about his past. He has never returned to Dubai, not even for family funerals. Lina rests in a cemetery overlooking the Mediterranean, visited by parents who still don't understand why their daughter died so young. They keep fresh flowers on her grave and photos of her smiling face in their living room, preserved as the brilliant young woman who was going to conquer the world. The truth remains buried deeper than Lina herself, known only to 3 people. One dead, one in exile, and one living a life sentence of his own making. The perfect crime was never prosecuted, never investigated, never solved. But it was also never forgotten. Not by the men who must carry its weight until their own deaths finally release them from the silence that has become their prison.